you for joining me for another video. Last week, if you tuned into that video, we got into the topic of the Oral Torah. I introduced you to the concept of the Oral Torah and brought up the very first part of the Oral Torah, which is the Mishnah. If you haven't seen it yet and you just have no idea what I'm telling you about, what was this guy talking about? What is the Mishnah? Go back and watch that video. I did try to keep it as short as I could, but it covers like 63 tractates, so it is quite long. It actually ended up being about an hour long. I think closer to 50 minutes, but it was quite extensive. There was just so much information there that I couldn't really get too deep into exactly what was going on. But one thing that I think I may have forgotten last week that I am going to say this week is that the Mishnah also contains the rulings of the Sanhedrin. Now the Sanhedrin, any ruling that they make, and this is according to God's command in Deuteronomy 17 verses 8 through 13, any command that the Sanhedrin gives, any ruling that they give, any legal ruling that they give, is considered binding from the Torah, because the Torah tells us that if there's a matter of doubt about some particular aspect of the Torah itself, you're to go to the Sanhedrin at the chosen place, which Judaism defines as being specifically the chamber of hewn stones in the temple in Jerusalem, in what is now the country of Israel, what was once Judah, but before that it was Israel. It's an interesting historical topic in itself. What was Israel before it was Israel? Kind of a broader topic that I want to discuss here. Maybe I'll make a video about it. I would definitely like to do a video about, or several videos, perhaps an entire series, about the history of the people of Israel, but it's not important today. Back to the topic at hand. So the Sanhedrin can make legal rulings about a particular aspect of the Torah. What they're not allowed to do is abolish any part of the Torah, at least permanently. They can suspend parts of it, like right now the temple services, for example, are not going on. Temple/tabernacle services are not going on, and there's a reason for that. The reason is we don't have a temple or a tabernacle to do it in. Therefore, those commands are suspended until we can practically do it. Now, the Sanhedrin, as I mentioned, doesn't have the ability to change the Torah. They don't have the ability to abolish the Torah, but all they can do is legislate the observance thereof. And I'm actually going to give you an example in this video of a Mishnah that does just that. It actually specifically defines your obligations of a specific Torah commandment, and I'll wait until I get there before I jump too much into it, because today's topic is the Gemara. So now that I've kind of set the stage by introducing the Oral Torah last week and sort of reminding you this week, let's jump into it. Let's talk about the Gemara. So as the Mishnah grew older and the original context and the original understandings of the Mishnah itself grew more and more abstract to younger audiences, that was a problem. So the rabbis had to collect commentaries, basically, for the Mishnah and compile them all together, and that is what we call the Gemara, or the Talmud. Basically, the best analogy, maybe? The best way that I can provide an analogy for what exactly is taking place here is if you saw a meme on Facebook the other day that said, that a culture is faced with a problem. A solution is found to that problem. They implement the solution, and over time, the solution, the reason behind that solution gets forgotten. And so they just keep doing this solution over and over and over again out of tradition until a new generation comes along and says, well, we don't need this tradition. This is really kind of a silly tradition. So they stop keeping that tradition. The problem represents itself, and suddenly they're left with the problem, and they have no idea how to fix it because they don't want to go back to the tradition, which solved the problem. And that's really what we're dealing with when it comes to the Gemara. It takes the Mishnah, expounds on the teachings for the contemporary audiences so that they wouldn't forget the reasoning behind it, because again, if they forgot the reasoning behind a various or any given Mishnah, well, that doesn't bode very well for the future, because what's going to happen ultimately is some younger generation, like, I don't want to point fingers here, but the reform movement of a couple hundred years ago just started saying, hey, we don't need this tradition. Why do we even have it anyway? The Gemara was designed to prevent that problem and to present the oral Torah in contemporary terms to the younger generation, in addition to providing a few more insights into it. Now, the Gemara is compiled into a book called the Talmud. The Talmud, depending on its usage, it can mean either the book itself or the Gemara. What I mean by the book itself is the book of the Talmud. It's not one book, by the way. There are 63 tractates, so as you might imagine, there are, at least that many volumes. The Talmud is a combination of both the Mishnah and the Gemara for that particular Mishnah, compiled into one book. But it's also common to call the Gemara Talmud. Talmud just means like learning or instructing. It can actually be, depending on its usage, it can actually be either the active or the passive verb. To teach or to learn. It's actually kind of interesting in that way. Now, it was written in two different versions. There was one that was written in Galilee, and then there was one that was written, and that was about, it was finished right around, I want to say about 400 to 500 CE. So this is the, the 5th to 6th century CE. I don't know. My mind is not mathing right now because it's a Sunday and I don't like doing math. Nobody does. But that's not important right now. The second version of the Talmud actually came about 100 or 200 years later, and in what is now, or what was once called Babylonia. And as you might imagine, we call that one the Babylonian Talmud. The other one that was written in Galilee, for some reason we call it the Jerusalem Talmud. I'm not really 100% on why we call it that, but that's, there are a couple of different names for it, but one of them is Jerusalem Talmud. Not actually sure why. One of them is the Talmud of Eretz Israel, which is the Talmud for the land of Israel. Another one is Palestinian Talmud. That refers back to, it's not the referring to the current political situation going on in the Middle East. It's actually referring back to, it was written in the Roman province of Syria, Palestina. So Palestina, Palestinian. Now you can see where that goes. Take a glance at my notes here. Now, both of them contain unique material. Both of them contain different information about local customs, folklores, histories, philosophies. And part of the reason for that is because, as you might imagine, both versions were written at different times in different countries by different rabbis. So they were dealing with two very different audiences. But both of them essentially say the same thing in terms of what the law is. They just had to word them differently for different populations. That being said, they actually are also written in two different dialects of Jewish Aramaic, contemporary at the time. Now, all of that goes to make it a really important anthropological tool for the study of Jews at that time. Now, they were written in some sort of I don't know. They were written in a sort of coded language, if you want to call it that. For the sake of brevity, it was, it's a very short, very terse, very the opposite of me language that any scholar can pick up and, understand what's going on. He can, interpret the code, if you want, if that's what we're going with. If that's the analogy we're going with, he's a code breaker, and he knows the code because he's got the secret decoder ring or whatever. I guess they don't have those anymore. I'm a little sad about that. They did that for the sake of brevity, because after all, it is 63 tractates long. However, it's 63 tractates long, so keeping it short is just not happening. Now, that being said, not every Mishnah, not every tractate of the Mishnah has a corresponding Gemara. Apparently, it just wasn't important to write a Gemara for those particular tractates. And they get into all sorts of interesting details. My favorite is where you've got, let's say there's a rabbi in the Jerusalem Talmud, and there's a rabbi in the Babylonian Talmud, and they both say something that sounds just completely wild and completely different when compared with each other. But there is actually a little bit of crossover between the two, where the Babylonian Talmud, because it came later, will say in the West, in Israel, this is what they said, and then it'll quote a Babylonian rabbi who says something that seems different, but the Talmud goes on to explain how even though they're giving what seems to be two very different opinions, it's actually the same opinion, they're just expressing it in different ways, and I think that that's a little bit strange, but that's neither here nor there. Now, it is common in the Talmud, actually. This is really just kind of a hilarious quirk if you study the Talmud. It's extremely common for the rabbis to discuss entirely hypothetical situations, meaning they're going to invent a problem. Then they're going to say what should be, what would be the ruling in this case, and then the rabbis are going to debate it, and then they're going to come to a ruling on a completely and totally unimportant topic because it was a hypothetical to start with, meaning that they never had anybody present the actual case to them before. So that's fun, and it's funny. So there's both of those going for it. Meanwhile, the rest of us are just sort of sitting back and we're just like, okay, but if any man wants to pay the bridal price, of the equivalent of a modern U.S. penny, to acquire his bride, his wife is not going to be particularly happy with him, so why would he do that? It's that sort of thing. And yes, in case you're curious, yes, that is an actual discussion that's in the Talmud. It's hilarious when you come across it, because one rabbi's like, oh, well, I'm just using American money for reference here. So one rabbi is like, oh, well, the minimum bridal price is a penny. And another rabbi is like, are you insane? No woman's going to be happy with that. $1 is the minimum bridal price. And it's like, dude, if you try to marry a woman with a penny or $1, she's going to go find somebody else. It's just that easy, But honestly, I expect nothing less from a commentary on any sort of law, really. Now, the Talmud, I mentioned this earlier, it contains the Mishnah within it, and the commentary that goes with any given Mishnah. Now, the pages of the Talmud are labeled page A and page B. This is where it gets really sort of strange, I guess, to modern readers. But for those of us who were born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, those of us who remember things before Netflix, before CDs, those of us who remember what an 8-track looks like, you're going to remember audio cassette tapes. You remember how they have a side A and a side B, and it's just different sides of the same cassette tape, and it plays all the songs on side A, then you have to take out the tape, flip it over, put it in, and it plays all the songs on side B. And then, if you didn't go to the end of side B, you have to rewind it on side A or side B. You can rewind, fast forward. Anyway, nostalgia aside, the Talmud is basically written the same way. You've got page A and page B, which are different sides of the same page. Just to drive home this example, the very first page in the Talmud is Berachot, that's the tractate. Page 2, which is the page number. And by the way, just kind of a side note, Jewish books always begin with page 2. There's a very deep and mystical and highly spiritual reason for that. And the reason for that is because page 1 is always the cover page. So that's funny. It's not mystical or spiritual or deep or anything at all, really. It's practical. Page 1 was the cover page. So page 2 is the very first page of every Talmud, every Tanakh, every Midrash, and we'll talk about Midrash in a minute. So Berachot 2a is going to be the first side of the first page of Berachot. Berachot 2b is going to be the, if you turn the page, it's going to be what's on that side of the page, page 2, tractate Berachot. So it's actually, it makes things relatively simple once you understand that. Now, a Mishnah is usually less than a page. It's less than the side of a page, usually. There are a couple exceptions that'll take up the overwhelming majority of, page, some random number A, or, perhaps it'll even take up the entirety of the page, both sides A and B. But usually it takes up, just a little, paragraph or two. The Gemara doesn't have those kind of restrictions because it's a commentary. So it can actually go for several pages, several sides of several pages. So there's that. The Gemara is arranged according to the tractate of the Mishnah that it corresponds with, in addition to the legal information that the Gemara gives. The Talmud also offers some really sort of often colorful, fantastical, homiletical, legendary type stuff, teachings that collectively are called a midrash. Midrash refers to the type of teaching that it is. It means like an interpretive teaching. So there's that. I told you it was an interpretive teaching and then explained that it's an interpretive teaching. That's interesting. Repetition is the key to remembering things. Midrashim are not arranged according to the tractate of the Mishnah. They're actually arranged according to the biblical order. Specifically, the biblical portion, the Torah portion that we read every week in the synagogue, they're arranged according to Torah portion. So you're going to find where information will be repeated in one midrash and it'll be repeated in a later midrash, and that's because the two midrashim are actually connected to each other, are actually talking about the same topic, the same often the same biblical characters, that sort of thing. Midrashic teachings often will focus on a single word or even sometimes a single letter within a word. They will just sort of derive greater meaning to the biblical passage that way, usually just through teaching. Now, because they are commentaries and because differences of opinion abound, there's the expression, where there are two Jews, there are three opinions, It's not uncommon for midrashim, which is the plural of midrash, to differ from each other, to have differences of opinion. Both are considered true. If not at the literal level, at the teaching level. The Darash, the actual teaching that comes out of it, is true, even if the premise of that particular midrash is not true. Let me give you an example. There are midrashim that say that, we'll pick on Noah, for example. Noah, his flood, there are midrashim that say that it was a truly global event. The water covered the entire planet. And then there are other midrashim that say, well, but why do we need that? It was just a regional flood. It was just the inhabited region that he lived in. That you don't have to flood the entire planet, man. You just, just little bowl that people are living in. And it was a bowl. Torah actually very plainly tells us that there was a valley there. So, bowl. Both teachings are true, even though, at the very least, one of the midrashim is not, the premise behind it, that is the extent of the flood, is not true at the literal level. So you're going to find that a lot. One thing that is interesting, I think, about the midrashim is there are some times where you're going to find them where they'll say that they'll say something that is consistent with the Masoretic text of the Torah, and then there are other midrashim that will use the Samaritan or the Septuagint as the basis for that particular midrash. I think that that's interesting because what that shows is that in ancient Israel there was a little bit more fluidity to what was considered acceptable in terms of scripture, I guess. And I still, to this day, I will compare the Masoretic tradition with the Samaritan tradition, with the Septuagint tradition, just to kind of glean a little bit of extra, knowledge from it, as I believe I mentioned in my video about the Torah itself. Now, because we are coming up on the end here, we're running shorter on time than I wanted to. I'm going to read a little bit of the Midrash. I'm going to read a little bit of the, not Midrash, the Mishnah. I'm going to read a little bit of the Gemara that goes with it, and I'm going to read a Mishnah just to give you examples. So, I am legally prohibited from showing you the book or from reading it directly, but I will paraphrase it. I love legal. There is a biblical commandment. There is a commandment in the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 6, verse 7, that tells us that we are to recite the Shema when we arise and when we lie down. So enter the Mishnah, and it tells us when we do that. So it asks the question, it says, at what point are we obligated to say the Shema at evening? The answer is from the time that the Kohanim, that's our priestly family, these are the descendants, the male descendants of Aaron, the brother of Moses. From the time that the Kohanim can go and eat their terumah, which takes place at nightfall, until the end of the first watch, and that's according to the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. But the sages and their opinion, just so that you know, their opinion is the ruling opinion, the sages, because again, they were the ones who were authorized by the Torah to make the ruling. So the sages say, the Hachamim tell us that the latest it could be recited is until midnight. But Rabban Gamliel, who lived about 2,000 years ago, he's actually famously mentioned in the Gospels of the New Testament. Rabban Gamliel says really the obligation to say the Shema at night, really it goes on until the sun rises in the morning. Now it tells us a story. It tells us that it once happened that Rabban Gamliel's sons came back from a wedding feast, and they said to him, "Oh, we haven't said Shema yet. Can we still say it?" But it was after midnight, and Rabban Gamliel said, "Listen, man, you're still obligated to do it until sunrise." That's where that story ends. Then it tells us that the Mishnah tells us that it was not only in cases like this that the sages would say until midnight, but it was also anything that the mitzvah, the commandment, extends really until sunrise the next morning. The sages would say at midnight, and that applies to things like when the eating of certain offerings that were offered in the tabernacle services, tabernacle/temple services. Really, that commandment applies until the sun rises in the morning. So then it asks the question, well, why did the sages tell us that it should be cut off at midnight? And the answer is to separate us from sin, to keep us from accidentally sinning. So you couldn't say, "Oh, I'll say Shema after I take a short nap," because what if you wake up in the morning and it's morning and the sun has risen and you haven't said Shema yet? Well, you missed the chance to say Shema. Now, enter the Gemara, and it says, what is the teacher of this particular Mishnah telling us? What is he referring to? That he says, from what time can we say the Shema in the evenings? And also, why is he talking about the evening Shema first? Why not the morning Shema? And he says, the Gemara tells us it refers to where it's written, when you lie down and when you arise. And that's in Deuteronomy 6:7. And that's the Jewish versing. I'm not sure I don't know if Christian versions will have a different verse number there. Normally, the verses line up exactly, but there are some places in the Tanakh where Christian verses and Jewish verses will be different. A good example is the end of the book of Malachi, but let's not talk about that right now. So he clarifies it's talking about the verse when you lie down and when you arise. Then it says, what it's saying here is when is the time for saying the Shema as it relates to lying down. Then it tells us, it answers the question from the time that the Kohanim, who were Tameh, they were ritually unclean, from the time that they can enter to eat their terumah, which is a special offering. Then the Gemara, and this is going to be the last bit of the Gemara that I'm going to read here, says, or if you want to say it this way, say that the teacher here of the Mishnah is deriving this from the creation of the world. Now that is part of Berachot 2a. So if you were looking for that, wonderful. Now you know what Berachot 2a says. Now I'm going to read to you from the Midrash. I'm just going to give you, there are two kinds of Midrashim. You have the Agadic Midrashim, which are really just sort of teachings, legendary type stuff, whereas there are also Halachic Midrashim, which are teachings that sort of support the legal precedents that they support. I've got it written down in my notes exactly how I wanted to say that, and I'm just having an issue with it here. A legal principle. An halachic midrash gives support for a legal principle from a midrashic teaching based on the written Torah. Now, that being said, if you happen to have the Midrash Rabbah for the book of Genesis, we're going to, since we picked on Noah earlier, we're going to pick on him again. Go to Parashat Noah. This is going to be chapter 32, Midrash 11. It's commenting on the verse that says that the waters filled up 15 amoth, that's 15 cubits, so that the hills were covered. The Midrash tells us that Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Nehemiah, they disagreed about what exactly this particular passage means. Rabbi Yehuda was of the opinion that it was 15 amoth deep on the mountaintops and 15 amoth deep in the valley, so that it just sort of, if the hills kind of do like this, so the water just kind of does like that with it, so that it was 15 amoth deep all around the area that was flooded. Rather fantastical, right? That's not how water works. But Rabbi Nehemiah says, no, it was 15 amoth deep on the tops of the hills, but in the valley it was, it was however deep it was. However deep the valley was, plus 15 amoth. So there's that. And that's all I got today. That's all the time I'm going to take today for this video. I have gone longer than I wanted to, but that's okay, because I did actually give you examples from the Midrash, from the Mishnah, and from the Gemara. So now, when I use those terms, you have some indication of what it is that I'm talking about. Thank you for joining me this week. And if you like this video, as always, go ahead and hit that like button. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to this channel and turn the notifications for this channel on so that you can be alerted whenever I post a video. Should be posting more than one video a week here in the relatively near future. I don't know. We're going to see about that. But it looks like I've got material that's going to last me. I could do maybe 2 videos a week, hopefully, indefinitely at this point, but I'd like to start putting them out. Might not happen every week for a while, but 2 videos every few weeks, okay, cool. Either way, you're not going to lose this 1 video a week thing. I will not go down in number. I'll only go up. So That being said, if you have not yet, go find me on Facebook, an unorthodox Jew, sorry, can't speak today, an unorthodox Jew. Find me on Facebook, go ahead and like and or follow that. I would like to eventually put out some material that's exclusive to the Facebook page, but we'll see how that goes. That being said, have a great week, and next week, join me right back here for the next segment of the Jewish Torah tradition. We're going to talk about halachic texts. Halacha is the practical application of Jewish law, of religious law, of civil law, all of that. So we're going to talk about the texts that detail halacha. It falls after the Gemara in terms of chronology. So I guess you could argue it's the next step in the oral Torah transmission. That being said, have a great week, and I will see you back here next week.